All right, so the first thing is intentional torts. Now, intentional torts, guys, this definitely will get a little tricky on the MBE. On the essay, it's more of a issue with issue spotting, in my opinion, but going through the elements and whatnot are pretty straightforward. So these aren't anything crazy, but you do have to be on top of it. You need to know what the elements are. You need to know the common ways they're trying to trick you with these intentional torts, right? And be ready for those scenarios. So for today, we're going to go through all the intentional torts in the blueprint and walk through it and feel comfortable. But we're not going to do any hypos together. Those are going to be for you to do after class. So intentional torts, we'll just be doing some live hypos and going through the blueprint. So let's go ahead and get our folder system for intentional torts, right? So Sydney, congratulations on graduating yesterday.
Thank you, child.
How are you feeling on this Monday?
I'm ready to be legally fit, but I did not follow y'all directions.
See, I told you.
Celebrated a little too much.
Uh-huh. All right, we gonna make it through the day together. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So we got prima facie case. I'll start you off. Look at that. We got prima facie case as the first topic. What's after that?
In the overall folder system?
Yeah, for intentional torts.
Oh, got you. Okay. Then it's types of intentional torts and then defenses.
Perfect. How bad you gotta want to pass the bar, Sydney?
Better than I want to breathe.
Exactly. Let's get it. All right, so we got prima facie case, types of intentional torts, and defenses. Those are your three sections. All right, so let's get into the prima facie case first. The prima facie case is going to be, these are the four elements that are required for every single type of intentional tort. All right, looking at that blueprint, Charles, what are the four prima facie case elements?
Voluntary act, intent, causation, and forbidden harm.
Causation, and then forbidden harm. Now, Charles, every tort, you're going to learn like 5, 6, 7 of them. Every tort has the same four elements, but it can't be the exact same, right? Otherwise, it'd be no different. You'd be guilty of one, you'd be guilty of all four. Which of these four is going to change depending on the intentional tort that you're dealing with?
Harm?
Exactly, the forbidden harm. So for each tort, it protects against a different forbidden harm, right? Assault protects from a person feeling apprehensive of something. False imprisonment protects somebody from being imprisoned, right, somewhere, not free to move. Battery protects somebody from being met with physical or harmful contact, right? So each intentional tort will protect the plaintiff from a particular type of harm. But these other three are going to relatively be the exact same for each intentional tort. So let's go ahead and run through it. The first one is voluntary act, right? In order to find D guilty of any intentional tort, P must prove that D's conduct leading to P's harm was a chosen voluntary movement. This is not typically going to be an issue of dealing with involuntary movement, but if you happen to see a fact pattern where that's the case, it's going to be hard to find the defendant guilty of an intentional tort. All right, intent. This is definitely important. All right, so you have your general rule. In order to find D guilty of any intentional tort, the plaintiff must prove that the defendant intended to commit the act that caused the plaintiff's harm. Intended to commit the act, right? A lot of times where they'll try to trip you up is, oh, I didn't intend for you to suffer that harm. You don't have to intend that they actually suffer that harm, but just to do the act that caused the harm. Intent is satisfied if D acted with specific intent or general intent. Charles, go ahead and read that rule for specific intent.
Specific intent is presented when defendant had a desire or purpose to cause the plaintiff's harm.
All right, so this is that horrible type of tortfeasor, right? The one that is really wanted to, had the desire to cause that person some harm, right? And so it says, an example, I'm upset at the plaintiff and I push them down the stairs so they can hurt themselves. That's going to be specific intent. General intent is present when D knew with substantial certainty that P's harm would be a consequence of his actions. So it says D wants to scare P as P is walking up the stairs. D scares P and falls down the stairs. So even though, right, it's a little bit of arguments back and forth here, ultimately you're going to argue that D should have knew with substantial certainty that that harm would be a consequence of my actions. All right. So it's that it pretty much expands intent, right, by including general intent. Notes, intent does not require that D intended for the plaintiff to suffer the specific harm. Intent only requires that D intended to commit the act that caused P's harm. So example, D pushes P and P breaks their leg. Doesn't matter if D intended to break P's leg. Intent is met if D intended to push P. So another quick example of that one that I like to use is like, let's say Charles is about to sit down in his chair, right? And we're in a room full of friends, and I want to pull a practical joke on Charles. And right before he sits down, I pull out the chair from up under him. Well, Charles actually then happens to fall and break his tailbone. Charles, my initial argument is going to be, I shouldn't be guilty of an intentional tort here. Why?
Because I didn't intend for you. Well, I didn't have those intent for you to break your tailbone.
Exactly. However, the counter argument is going to be here, I intended to do the act that caused the harm. I intended to pull the chair out, and that was the act that caused the harm. And even if I didn't have the desire or purpose to cause the harm, I could still, the plaintiff can still prove general intent that I should know with substantial certainty that by causing somebody to fall like that could result in that harm. So there we go, guys. That is the basics of intent there. And so then now we get into the transferred intent rule. All right, so Lorraine, when you're doing an essay or an MBE, do you need to focus on transferred intent in every single scenario?
No.
When do you think would be the trigger or this like the situation in which you would even look to transferred intent?
I think if something comes, like a situation or another person or something changes, like like something like an intervening of some sort, like an intervention of some sort.
Okay, and let me look at it even not so much like a factual trigger just yet, but from a big picture, the only reason I would even look to transferred intent is if there is possibly an issue with satisfying intent. So Lorraine, the way we want to look at this is that like this is a tool in the plaintiff's tool bag to help satisfy intent. So if the defendant has a good argument of like, oh no, I didn't intend to do that, maybe transferred intent can help the plaintiff still satisfy this element, okay? So plaintiff is going to argue transferred intent. There are two scenarios in which it can apply. So first one is the tort to tort transfer. All right. So it says if D intends one intentional tort towards the victim and the victim suffers a different intentional tort, then you can transfer the intent from one to the other. So, Lorraine, if I were to, the fact pattern says I wanted to scare you. Let's say we're in a live classroom right now and I wanted to scare you and I wanted to act like I was throwing a marker at you, right? That was my whole, intent and desire. But then the marker slips out of my hand and then actually hits you in the forehead. And then now you want to sue me for battery. As the defendant, what is my argument going to be?
That you never intended to throw the marker at me. You just intended to scare me.
Exactly. And so what you're going to do, you have two arguments. You're going to, one, argue general intent, that I should have known with a substantial certainty, right, that would be a consequence of my actions. And in the alternative, you can also argue transferred intent, that here I intended to commit an assault because acting as though I'm going to throw the marker at you would be considered an assault, and we're going to transfer the intent from the assault to the battery. Perfect, right? So there you go. So that's, again, a back pocket argument for the plaintiff. We're going to transfer the intent from one tort to the other to help satisfy it. It says MBE tip, it is common to see an assault to battery transfer as seen in our example above, right? But I just did one with you. The next one, guys, is victim to victim transfer. All right, so Lorraine, let's say I do end up throwing the marker at you. You got my question wrong. I throw the marker at you. We're in the classroom, right? And then boom, you hit the matrix move. And you dodge the marker, and then pow, it hits Robert right in the back of the head because he was sitting behind you and he was turned around. Okay, and so now Robert is wanting to sue me for intentional torts. He's going to want to sue me for battery. Robert, what's my defense going to be in your claim against me?
That you didn't intend to hit me.
Exactly. And then your argument is
That the intent was transferred from victim to victim.
and so I did have the intent to commit a battery against Lorraine.
Mm-hmm. And then she dodged it and hit me, so it transferred to me.
There we go. Simple enough. So you have tort to tort transfer, and then you have victim to victim transfer. All right. Again, they were both rooted in the defendant having an argument. Hey, I didn't intend to hurt that person, or I didn't intend to commit that particular tort. Well, then you could try to use transferred intent. Transferred intent is applicable to all torts except what, Lorraine?
Conversion and intentional infliction of emotional distress.
There we go. All right, keep the train moving. Next, we have causation. In order to find the defendant guilty of any intentional tort, P must prove that D caused P's harm. Causation may be satisfied if defendant's conduct was a substantial factor in causing the harm. Typically, causation is not a big, tested area within torts, intentional torts, excuse me. It's typically a slam dunk. And then again, forbidden harm. For every tort, the forbidden harm at hand is going to change. Each one has a forbidden harm that they focus on. Okay. Charles, pretty straightforward there. No questions yet, I would guess.
Yeah, pretty straightforward.
All right. So I'm going to get rid of the prima facie case here. We're ready to move on. And so the first one we're going to get into, well, actually, let's go ahead and list out all of our intentional torts. It's really good to have a checklist of this, guys, as you're going through questions and, issue finding essays. So, Charles, can you go ahead and list out all of them from the voter system or blueprint for me, please?
Sure. Assault, battery, trespass to land, trespass to chattel, conversion, false imprisonment, intentional infliction of emotional distress.
Okay. And so I think I have it in the voter system. Did I put it in there? My mnemonic for remembering all of these. I don't see it there.
You guys see ABC fit?
Say it again.
ABC fit?
There we go. There's a couple of different ones we've had, but that will do it. A, B, C, and then fit with 2 T's. All right, assault, battery, conversion, false imprisonment, IIED, trespass to land, trespass to chattel. All right, so yeah, you can use that mnemonic. You can use whatever you want, but definitely try to have a checklist with this. All right, so let's go in order of the blueprint as we break these down. First off, assault. All right, I'm going to call on a different person for each intentional tort here in my top 5, right? And so let's start one more time with Charles. And every time I call on you guys to start off a new intentional tort, I want you to look at that rule and then focus on what is the forbidden harm. All right, so what is the forbidden harm with this first one, Charles, with assault?
It is reasonable apprehension of immediate harmful or offensive contact.
Exactly. You're protecting the plaintiff from having reasonable apprehension of immediate harmful or offensive contact. Cool. And then don't forget, in your full definition, you see in there the other prima facie elements. D, intentionally caused, right? The only thing that's not necessarily included in there is voluntary. And again, you can get away with that. It's okay. All right, so let's go through the elements. Intentionally, we know it. Caused, we know it. Reasonable apprehension. Before we look into our rule really quickly, Charles, what does reasonable apprehension mean?
That it's reasonable that a person would be apprehensive to your conduct.
Okay, you like to use the word to define the word.
Okay, let me see. I was just, like, it's reasonable for someone to be afraid of something or to be startled.
Okay, so and that's exactly what's going to be my follow-up question is like, what does apprehension not require? And it's so natural for us, Charles, to want to connect it to being fearful or afraid, but it doesn't require that. And they actually test that difference. Somebody could be apprehensive of something, but still not be afraid, right? So you see the example. If I ball up my fist to hit 300-pound Shaquille O'Neal, he could still be apprehensive of being hit, but he's probably not afraid or in fear of me hitting him. But that would still be an assault, okay? So keep that in mind. So apprehensive, yeah, it's a tough one to define without using the word. But basically, the biggest word I like to use is the person is anticipating some harmful or offensive contact, okay? So essay tip, harmful or offensive, plus state facts, and why it was reasonable to be apprehensive. And then 3, prove P's awareness of D's conduct. So just some things to look out for there. But the biggest thing, Charles, that helps for assault is when the plaintiff is aware of the defendant's conduct. So in that hypo earlier, when I said it ended up hitting Robert in the back of the head, the marker, right? Chances are then he did not see that marker coming. So he would be able to sue me for battery, but he had very low chances of suing me for assault because he didn't see it. However, if I were to throw the marker at Robert while he was looking at me and he saw the marker coming, boom, it makes contact, that would be assault because he was apprehensive, even if it was just a second. Even if he was like this and then turned around right before he got hit, if it was a second of being apprehensive, that would be assault, and then the battery is the actual contact. All right, next is immediate. P must be apprehensive of immediate contact. D must apparently present the ability to carry out the threat immediately. Words may negate immediacy. So assault is only for like in the moment things, right? So that's what the immediate element is. Example, I say to Charles, I'm going to punch you in the face if you don't have my money by tomorrow, right? So saying that is, even if we're in person, Charles, that's not going to be an assault because I'm threatening some harm that will take place tomorrow. All right. And then shoot, we're all on Zoom right now. If, Aaron gets a question wrong and I flinch at the camera like I'm going to hit him, well, there's no immediacy of me actually making any harmful or offensive contact since we are virtual, right? That would not be an assault. Things like that. Has to be immediate. Next, harmful or offensive contact. So, do we need both harmful and offensive contact or just one of them?
I'll say both harmful and offensive.
So no, we actually just need one. So, and they're two different things, yeah? So harmful is anything that's going to cause pain or bodily damage. So your one type of assault is everything around just like, being aware seconds before you were met with some type of physical harm or contact. So that's harmful. Those are the easy ones to essentially spot out. Offensive contact is any type of contact a reasonable person would find to be offensive. All right, factors include context, time, place, relationship of the parties, and nature of the act. Some things are inherently offensive. All right, so, I hate to even give this example because it's so just disgusting and disrespectful. So I'm not even going to say I did it, but Charles, let's say you was out at, Starbucks and some crazy person spit on you, man. Like they just hawked up a loogie and just fired one off at you. Is that going to be harmful or offensive contact that you were apprehensive of?
Very offensive.
Very offensive, right? So that's exactly the type of stuff that you're looking for. Now, there's things like that are just black and white offensive, and then they'll do other things where like maybe you can go back and forth, and you'll just kind of play it by ear. Now, what if, Charles? You have an example like this, in your hypos, but we can go through it. What if, you went on a first date, Charles, with somebody, and you brought some flowers to that first date, and you went to hand the flowers to this date of yours, and your date freaks out and it turns out they have a phobia of flowers, right? And so then now they're suing you for assault because that was offensive to them. In that base hypo, is that plaintiff going to be successful?
I want to say no, because it's not something that's reasonable. Most people aren't afraid of flowers,
Perfect.
so I wouldn't have known that.
So that would be there was no harmful contact or offensive contact. Now, there is one exception. I did all that to build up to this exception where the plaintiff can use it. The plaintiff uses, if you look in your blueprint, this known sensitivity rule. Now, when something is not reasonably offensive to the everyday person, they can still be successful if they can prove that the defendant happened to know of the plaintiff's high sensitivity to whatever it is. So if the fact pattern said, right, that Charles happened to be aware of his date's phobia for flowers and still brought it anyway, well, then now that would be he knew of the sensitivity, and then now this element would be satisfied. Fair enough, Charles?
Fair enough.
Cool. For assault, the victim does not need to suffer the harmful or offensive contact. Remember that, guys. For assault, you don't actually have to suffer it. The victim must just be reasonably apprehensive of it, but you don't actually, contact does not need to be made. All right. Assault is commonly paired with the self-defense and defense of others. I'm not going to read through all the notes, but basically for each of the intentional torts, at the bottom of it, I tell you which defenses that tort is commonly paired with. All right, moving on to the next one. Then we have battery. All right, so let's go back to Wood on this one. So battery, what is the forbidden harm that we're focused on preventing here, Wood?
Causing harmful offensive contact to a plaintiff.
Exactly, to the plaintiff's person. And so, yeah, very similar to assault in the elements, right? So let's run through it really quickly. You have intentional, you have cause, the exact same. Harmful or offensive contact, the same. All right. Note on offensive contact, a person is presumed to impliedly consent to the ordinary contacts of daily life, right? So what that's saying, Wood, is like if you see a hypo where you're on the public bus or the public train and somebody happens to touch you or bump into you, right? Things like that, you're not going to be able to sue for battery. That's going to be the ordinary contacts of daily life. All right. So that's that. The fourth element is really what makes this one different from assault, where it's like now you're talking about contact with P's person. All right. So if the marker actually makes contact, if the person when they spit, if it makes contact with the person, there you go. Also keep in mind, P's person extends not just to the person, like your body, but also to things closely connected to it as well. So let's say a person is walking with a purse, okay, and somebody comes up and doesn't touch the person's body, but touches the purse, snatches it, and runs off, right? That's still going to satisfy this element. It's closely connected. Okay. Assault and battery, peanut butter and jelly topics. You guys should know this at this point of your law school journey. Pretty straightforward stuff there. Again, you'll be doing more hypos later. All right, let's move on to the next one. Let's stick with Wood one more time since battery was so easy. Wood, what is going to be the forbidden harm for trespass to land?
Intentionally intruding into someone's plaintiff's real property.
Okay, and for now, we're going to take out the intentional part because we're just focused just on the forbidden harm. So it's the forbidden harm is protecting plaintiffs from having people intrude onto their real property. All right, so let's go ahead and do eyes up. Let's do this one different. I'm going to give you a live hypo, Wood, so no more looking at the blueprint. And then I want you to tell me if you think this is going to be met or not, and we'll run through the elements. All right, so let's say you live in a gated community, right, where, speaking of which, in property law, whenever we see gated community, might be testing what? I threw the curveball at you. Implied reciprocal servitude.
Cool. So, yeah. Yeah, I was gonna say covenants, but it's part of it. But
Okay, it's in that world exactly. Okay, it's popping up, just keeping you on your toes. But let's say you have a gated community. All the houses look the same. And let's say yesterday was graduation, right? You happen to go out and celebrate with Sydney, and as we can all guess, Sydney likes to celebrate. So y'all have some drinks, y'all have a good time. All right, you get home, right? It's late, and you approach the door, you open the door, you go in, and you immediately see that, oh shoot, I just went into my neighbor's house. I went into the wrong house, right? Without causing any damage to the property, you back out, you close the door, and then you go home. That neighbor then wants to sue you for trespass to land. What's your gut telling you? Is that person going to be successful, or are you going to be successful in your defense?
The neighbor is going to be successful.
Exactly. So I just gave you guys one of the typical hypos and ways they like to test you, is where the defendant didn't intend to trespass. But you don't need to intend to trespass. You just need to intend to do the act that caused the harm. And here, Wood intended to enter that home. So you can't use mistake as a defense for this. So again, look out for that scenario on your questions. And you see that in your notes under intentionally. That's one of the biggest things I like to test on for trespass to land. After that, you have causation, pretty straightforward. Definitely take a note for all of the different types of physical intrusion. So you could have it where D physically enter P's property without permission. That's what we just saw with Wood. How about D remains on the property without the right or permission to be there? Hey, Wood, you want to come over for game 1 of the NBA Finals on Thursday? Wood says, yeah, sure, no problem. All right, game 1 of the finals starts and ends. Game is over, and Wood won't leave. He's still in my house, all right? That's going to be trespass to land if he has now remained there after his permission or right to be there has expired.
The food was good, my bad.
That's right. So then the next one is D causes an item or object to enter P's property without permission, right? So this is the classic, right? When Elijah's in his backyard, shooting basketball. That's not his first sport. And he just got all the bricks just landing over in the neighbor's yard when he's missing the ball, causing something on your property to enter over into somebody else's property can be considered trespass to land, right? So keep that in mind. D causes an item or object to enter P's property without permission. Elijah, how's your jump shot? Is it decent?
Yeah, it ain't bad. I'm not very good at sports with my hands, though. So
it wasn't very convincing at all.
I didn't grow up using the hands in sports.
Fair enough. He's a phenomenal soccer player, y'all. All right, so then we're going on to P's real property. So this is just a note, right? You can get some questions when it comes to on a property. Sometimes, again, it's a simple question. If you cause the basketball to enter the person's land, it's on the land, right? No big deal. But what about how high in the air does this protection cover, and how far below the land does this protection cover? So if you have the house, right, and you have all this land or whatever, it's basically this rule protects so much of the airspace and so much of the subterranean space, right? So above and below. And it says typically it'll extend 1,000 feet into the air and 50 to 150 feet below. All right. What would be a popular tech device that a lot of people have now that could be entering somebody's airspace in somebody else's land?
Drone.
A drone, exactly. So if I fly a drone over into my neighbor's yard and it's within 1,000 feet of their property, they can argue trespass to land. There we go. Okay. Wood, please read that first note for me. Very, very important that you guys remember this.
D Well, the defendant need only to defendant need only intend to enter P's land. Whether D actually intended to trespass is irrelevant.
Oh no, I'm sorry, and my bad. That is
Oh.
that is the first note technically. So number 5, and it says note.
Oh.
Yep.
My bad. Injury to the land is not required for these elements to be met. The physical intrusion is enough.
Good.
Example. Oh, sorry. Keep going.
No, you don't need to do that because we've already done the example together, and it's just a reminder, guys. You do not need to do anything. Remember in Wood's example, soon as he realized something was off, this is not his house, he closed the door, stepped out, and I said there was no damage caused to the land. It doesn't matter, right? They're still going to be able to sue you for nominal damages, right? Remember, nominal damages are just the elements of the intentional tort are met, and I could sue you for $1, right? People are petty. People do that, okay? So this intentional tort is commonly paired with the consent, necessity, and defense, blah, blah, blah. Okay, moving on to the next one, trespass to chattel. All right, so let's go to Josie. Josie, how you doing today? Tired? Oh, was you with Sydney yesterday?
I actually was with Sydney yesterday.
Oh, shoot. See, I told y'all, man. Sydney getting y'all contagious with her energy. I already know it. All right, so we have trespass to chattel. What is the forbidden harm with trespass to chattel?
Interfering with the plaintiff's right to possession of their personal property.
There we go. So we're talking about personal property. Give me a quick example of some personal property.
Like your purse or your money.
Or your money, or your laptop, or your phone, right? My iPad, right? All things that are tangible goods, things like that. Not real property, not your home. All right, so quick example for you, Josie. We're sitting down in the library together, right? And we both have MacBooks, space gray, 16 gigabyte, right? They look exactly the same. We're sitting and studying. And then when we're leaving, I happen to pick up yours by accident and I take it home with me, okay? And then maybe a day goes by until I give it back to you. Is that going to be considered trespass to chattel?
Yeah, I think so.
Yes. D need only intend to interfere with P's possession. Whether D actually intended to wrongfully take or interfere is irrelevant. So this intent is a lot like we just saw it with trespass to land. Mistake as to who owns the property is not a defense. All right? So just remember that. They're going to try to test you on that, try to trip you up. They're going to try to play to your emotions. DeAndre didn't mean to take the wrong computer. It was an accident. No damage was done to it. Wood didn't mean to go into the other house, right? But don't follow your emotion. Now, this next element is important. Interference with P's right to possession of her personal property. This element is met when D damages P's property or prevents P from using or possessing their personal property. Temporary disruption of possession is often sufficient. All right, so here again, it said I dispossessed you of your property for a day. That would be enough to have this interference for trespass to chattel. All right, it says note, damage to the chattel is not required for these elements to be met. The disruption of possession is enough on its own. And then also it says this element is met when D injures P's pet or affects the pet in a way that deprives P of the use of their pet. Example, D intentionally runs over P's dog, so sad, and breaks the dog's legs. This will be a trespass to chattel. Again, these tort questions are going to really be playing to your emotions. Make sure you guys are not going too crazy with your answers just because of how it might be affected you. But I also want to shed some light again, right? I had never seen this pet rule, right? So it's like you go through bar prep, you go through this question, and it's like, oh, somebody ran over somebody's dog. Like, what is that? What torts are that? Unique scenario, and it's like, oh, that's what it is. And then now I store that, hey, injuring somebody's pet, right? Pets are considered personal property. I make that a story. I make that something I remember, and then now I move forward with it. In this case, it made it to the blueprint. Sometimes it doesn't always make it to the blueprint. All right, next is personal property. No rule here, just need to show that it was personal property. Don't forget, pets are personal property. Okay. Josie, pretty straightforward, trespass to chattel?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Moving on to conversion. What's the forbidden harm there, Josie?
It's a serious interference with the plaintiff's right of possession of their personal property.
Exactly. So very, very similar. And right, remember, now these are peanut butter and jelly topics: trespass to chattel and conversion. Conversion is the elevated, right, tort for trespass to chattel. When the interference goes from being basic to serious, the tort elevates from trespass to chattel to conversion. Would one be guilty of both trespass to chattel and conversion, Josie?
No, right? Don't they? It's one or the other. I don't want to
Exactly.
say they merge, but like it's one or the other.
Exactly. So if it's trespass to chattel only, that means it didn't rise to conversion. It's just trespass to chattel. So the only scenario where maybe it's like if it was like very serious, and if it's very serious, it would elevate to conversion, and you would just need conversion, not both. Okay. So again, look out for the particular rules on intent. Everything is the same as trespass to chattel. It's just the level of interference. Go ahead and read that rule for us on serious interference, Josie.
This element is met when defendant severely damages plaintiff's property or prevents plaintiff from using or possessing their personal property to the extent that it warrants the defendant to pay for the full value of the item. Minor damage or temporary disruption of possession is insufficient.
So what would be your biggest buzzword to take out of that? If you're looking at like, all right, what's my little small takeaway to keep in mind? What's it going to be?
Severely damaged or warrants to pay full price.
Exactly. And this is also what we've been talking about, right? With operative part of the rule when you're doing your analysis, right? And really the operative part of the rule here is that this whole it was damaged or you were dispossessed to the point where it warrants the defendant to pay the full value of the item, right? So again, when we just did that example a second ago, Josie, where I took your computer, I realized a day later it was yours, I returned it with no damage. Is that a scenario where you need to be given the full value of that item?
No.
No. But if I took your computer, I took it home, my little brother started playing with it and poured chocolate milk on it, the keyboard is all frazzled, it doesn't work anymore, etc., etc. Well, there, right, it would likely elevate to conversion if the computer is broken and the full value should be warranted, right? So there you go. Pretty straightforward. Okay. Take a note on that highlighted note at the bottom with the chili pepper. Go ahead and read that last one for me, Josie.
The remedy for conversion is the full market value of the personal property at the time of the conversion.
They are going to test this, Josie. They're going to give you a scenario where it's like, oh, the computer cost Josie $3,000 when she bought it a year ago. She could buy it right now for $2,500. The cost of repair would be $600. They're going to throw all these numbers at you just to confuse you. And the answer is typically simple when you know your rule. It's the full market value of that item at the time of the conversion. So you look for whatever fact best indicates what the market value of that item is at the time of conversion, and that's your remedy. Okay, so again, it'll be straightforward when you get your fact pattern. Just know they're throwing extra numbers at you. Most of the remedies questions works, they throw extra numbers at you, and you have to know which ones you actually need to use. All right, let's keep this train moving. Nice, we only have 2 more. All right, so let's go back to Sydney. Sydney, we still doing all right?
I'm okay, yeah.
So we got false imprisonment. Sydney, what's the forbidden harm for false imprisonment?
Confinement or suffered harm.
Yeah, so we're talking about confinement.
And that the plaintiff is aware of that confinement.
Exactly, right? So I would say we could simplify it in that, the forbidden harm here is confinement. And then, so then it's like a add-on that the plaintiff has to either be aware of that confinement or suffer harm. But at the end of the day, false imprisonment is about confinement. Okay? You go through the rules here. First, you have the definition of what does it mean to be confined. So you're looking for physical boundaries, right? Being locked in a room, physical restraint, being like bear hugged and you can't go anywhere. Imminent physical threats. Hey, I have a gun pointed at you, right? And I'm like, give me all your stuff. Obviously, you don't feel free to move, right? You feel pretty confined in that situation. Authority. The the Walmart security says, hey, you can't go anywhere, right? Puts you in like the little office in the back. Immobilization. Let's say somebody is currently on crutches or in a wheelchair to get around, and somebody takes their wheelchair or their crutches, and then now they're immobilized. Isolation. I say, hey Sydney, we're going to have a trip in what's the fun desert spot everybody goes to? Joshua Tree. We're going to Joshua Tree. Let's go. And we get there, and I pull a prank, and I like kick her out of the car, and then I drive off. She's just in the desert by herself. That would be isolation. So all those are different ways of confinement. Now, even if somebody is confined, there is an exception there. Okay, let's say I put Sydney in a car, and it's not her car. I lock her in there, but then I leave the trunk open, right? Well, the argument there, she can say, I was confined to this car. And on the other end, it's like, well, you could have escaped with very little effort there, and that would be a defense to whether she was actually confined. All right? So reasonable means of an escape is a defense. However, there's exceptions to the exception. If that means of escape was going to have a great risk of bodily harm, it won't work. If it was going to harm another person, risk of humiliation, or damage their own valued property, then it's not a reasonable means of escape. Okay? So the exception is reasonable means of escape, and basically you have the kind of like a list there of when it's not a reasonable means of escape. Denied entrance is not confinement, all right? So when they don't let you in the club, that's not confinement to outside. Denied entrance is not a confinement. P was aware of the confinement or suffered harm. Okay, so one scenario, boom, I throw Sydney in a room and I lock the door. I push her in the room, I lock the door. What are all the torts I just committed there, Sydney?
Harmful offensive contact, so I think like assault or battery, and then false imprisonment because I'm in a locked room and I'm aware and I can't leave.
Perfect. And you said assault or battery?
Well, I guess assault because I had apprehension. Did you push me from the front or back?
Ah, there we go. Asking the right question, Sydney. So let's say I pushed you from the front.
Then I saw it, so that's assault.
Exactly. And then definitely the battery because of the contact, and then false imprisonment because you're in the room. And then there you're aware of the confinement, right? You're aware of all of the scenario that's happening. So that'd be an easy scenario that we've seen with awareness. Now, what if Sydney is taking a nap in a room, right? And while she's in there, I lock the door, right? And while she sleeps, so she cannot leave. However, she sleeps. She's unaware of it. And before she wakes up, I unlocked the door again, but she was confined for those 2 hours. And that hypo, the way that I just gave it, right, Sydney would not have a claim for false imprisonment because she was not aware of it, nor did she suffer any harm. But let's say she was taking a nap, I locked it for 2 hours, and during that 2 hours, it just so happened that maybe some like toxic gas happened to come through the vent, and then she actually inhaled that and got sick. Well, because she happened to suffer some type of harm during that confinement she was unaware of, that would now amount to, satisfying this element, even though she wasn't aware. All right? So that's that. Okay, you guys can go through the notes. Pretty straightforward there. False imprisonment. Next, IIED. All right, so let's go back to Lorraine. Lorraine, looking at the prima facie elements here, not focused on the forbidden harm. I'm not focused on the forbidden harm, but just on the other 3 prima facie elements. What is unique about this tort compared to all the other ones?
That it could be met intentionally or recklessly.
Exactly. Go ahead. You want to add a little bit more?
No.
Okay. Drop the mic.
Yeah.
So we are dealing with intentional torts. This is the only intentional tort that doesn't require intent. It's still satisfied by intent, but it's satisfied by intent and recklessness. Okay? So it's definitely something important to see. They will test that element. And then what is the forbidden harm here, Lorraine?
That this defendant engaged in extreme or outrageous conduct that caused the person to suffer severe emotional distress.
All right. So we're protecting the plaintiff from extreme and outrageous conduct that leads to severe emotional distress. So again, a lot of elements there, a lot of adjectives: extreme, outrageous, severe, right? All those things. So make sure you're processing all of them. So we first talked about the first one: intentional or reckless. Reckless can suffice here. Recklessness would be met if the defendant acted in a way where he disregarded a high possibility that his conduct would cause peace harm. Look out for this one with IIED, when somebody plays just a very cruel joke on somebody and then it causes them emotional distress, and it's just like, okay, you just went too far. Even though that was a joke, that was just too far. Extreme or outrageous conduct, right? Is this going to be a bright line test, Lorraine?
I think no. I think it's going to be fact based, where you're going to have to analyze the facts around it.
Exactly, right? So that means when you're doing all of your MBEs and essays for these questions, you're going to be doing some gauge setting, right? And you're going to be figuring out, all right, what amounts to extreme and outrageous and what does not. And then I gave you the factors to consider: the context, the relationship between the parties, right? Typically, when it's somebody doing something to somebody else where there's more of a sense of trust, that makes it more likely that it's extreme and outrageous. What is P's vulnerability? D's motive? D's abuse of power? Frequency of conduct. Are you just repeatedly badgering somebody? All right, looking for all those things. Please read that note for us, Lorraine.
Sure. IIED is typically triggered by D making a threat or creating a traumatic experience.
Perfect. So guys, please remember this, right? IIED can be difficult to issue spot when you're doing intentional torts. And I need you to have that neurotransmitter reaction when you see something that just can be considered a traumatic experience, that you're thinking IIED. Okay? So we're going to do one hypo here in a little bit. May or may not be triggered, right? But think of traumatic experiences. Think of threats, right? To somebody's livelihood, things like that, right? IIED. Okay, next is severe emotional distress. So they also want to test this one too, right? Because if you just suffer emotional distress, is that going to give you a claim for IIED, Lorraine?
No.
No, it has to be severe. So don't forget that requirement. All right? Physical manifestation is not needed, but it is helpful, right? What would be an example of physical manifestation, Lorraine, of some emotional distress, you think?
I see someone starts crying, tears.
Crying, tears, heart attack, right? That would be even a better one, right? Some actual almost injury that's caused of it, things like that. And so, yeah, right? You're looking for some type of physical manifestation of that severe emotional distress. IIED can also be triggered by facts that P suffered emotional distress or that they fainted. So look out for those things. And then we have IIED claims by bystanders. A bystander rule right here is triggered when a bystander witnesses D's conduct towards another person and suffered severe emotional distress from witnessing the event. If bystander is a close relative of the victim, then you have a certain set of elements. And then if you're not a close relative of the victim, then the bystander needs to prove a different set of elements. And for the non-relative, it's the same elements, but there's a third one added on, right? So for close relative, it says the bystander was physically present and the defendant knew the bystander was present. And then if it's not a close relative, then they add on the third one: the bystander suffered bodily harm as a result. So you actually have to have some bodily harm that occurs from it. So Lorraine, let's say you're at a teacher-parent conference, right? And one of the teachers lose it during the meeting and they start spanking somebody else's child, right, in front of the whole classroom, in front of all the other parents and kids. They start spanking the child, and then that really affected you, and now you want to sue for IIED from witnessing this. All right, are you likely going to be successful there?
This is after you guys get me out of jail for assault.
Yep, this is after we get you out for holding it down.
This is after you guys get me out. If I suffered like a physical manifestation where it made me so upset that I fainted or I had a heart attack, knock on wood, then yes, I could have a claim for that.
Okay, good. You went exactly to the swing element there. You were a non-relative. It was somebody else's kid, right? It says you were physically present. The bystander should know you are. It was in a classroom, right? All that seemed to be met, and it came down to whether you suffered bodily harm. Exactly. Awesome. Way to do that, right? Remember, when you're studying, if it's not my hypos, which again, I try to create real life versions and examples for you guys to relate to, make sure you guys are doing that on your own so you can create memories for these examples to then, be able to easily see it later. All right, so those are all the intentional torts. It says, note, under the right set of facts, an injured party may try to sue under normal IIED or as a bystander, right? So again, you'll be doing your hypos later, but look out for that. You could try to sue under both, okay? And then a quick example of that, Lorraine, let's say it was your child that the teacher was spanking. Well, you might say that, hey, that person intentionally tried to cause me emotional distress, right? And doing that. And then also I could say, well, witnessing what happened to my child as a bystander, I can claim IIED. So sometimes you can claim both. If D, the defendant is unaware of the bystander's presence, they are never guilty of IIED by a bystander. So look out for that quick rule to get to that multiple choice correct answer. All right, go ahead and read that note on intentional torts damages for us, Lorraine.
Yes, actual damage to person, property, or land is not required for intentional torts. P is always entitled to nominal damages if elements of an intentional tort are met, but the more damage to the person, property, or land will result in more actual compensatory damages. P can also seek punitive damages if they can show D acted with malice and ill will.
All right. So again, just remember the concept of nominal damages. It introduced the idea of punitive damages there. We'll talk about damages and remedies a little bit more, but it's good to get that baseline understanding, right? $1 nominal damages if the elements are met, and then you just add on more money for the more harm that was caused, more medical bills, more damage to property, etc. Okay, so let's do a quick wrap up of this section. We're almost done. Let's just move on to the defenses. So the defenses for intentional tort. You see you have a chili pepper right there on self-defense. We're all familiar with the concept of self-defense. Okay, it says here that you can use, as the defendant, reasonable force to the extent necessary to prevent any threatened, harmful, offensive contact or confinement. All right, notes, mistaken belief. A defendant's mistaken belief is okay as long as it was reasonable, right? So is the mistake when you didn't really need to use self-defense, but you did it anyway? Is that gonna, be okay? It depends on whether it was reasonable under the circumstances. Deadly force. The only time you can use deadly force self-defense is when, Lorraine?
If you're threatened with death or serious bodily injury.
Exactly, right? But if I'm trying to push you, Lorraine can't then pull out a gun to protect herself, right? So remember, when it comes to self-defense, the idea is that you need to match your self-defense with what you're being faced, okay? Now, if I brought out a knife and am trying to stab her, even bringing out a gun, you could consider an elevation. That would still be okay because both of those would be considered deadly weapons, or I'm still trying to cause serious bodily injury, right? So, do keep that in mind. All right, then you have defense of others, right? So this is the example where you're going to be trying to save somebody else, right? And then you're going to use self-defense. So let's say I see Lorraine getting into an altercation with somebody. Somebody is trying to rob Lorraine, and then I go and tackle that person. Well, that person is going to sue me for battery, maybe assault if they saw it coming. I'm going to use defense of others. So Lorraine could have used self-defense there, and I'm using it for her to protect her. All right, so that's the concept. You can go through the rule, go through examples later. You have defense of property, right? Lorraine, from a policy perspective, do we want people using deadly force to protect their material items?
No.
No. How about to protect their home and their real property? Do we want them using deadly force?
No.
No,
I mean,
we don't want to take
no.
people's lives for this. Exactly. This is one of those areas for you can change your feelings right after the bar, but for right now, no deadly force when it comes to protecting your personal property or real property. The only way is that in the way that somebody is intruding on your personal property or real property, if they're meeting you with deadly force. So if somebody's entering your home with a gun trying to rob and is like ready to shoot, right? Well, then now you can meet with deadly force, but it's not because you're protecting your home. It's because you're using self-defense at that point. So
that's where you heard the hesitation, because I did that scenario in my head, and then I'm like, wait, no. I went back to the car in the driveway scenario.
there we go. Somebody just like the basic petty, thief that's just like unarmed and coming in. Like, yeah, that's not the person that you want to be, in this regard. Based off our torts law, meeting with deadly force. All right. Go through the rules for defensive property, but again, just keep that big policy in mind. The overall policy is don't use deadly force unless you have to. Next, you have recapture of property. So this is basically like somebody took your personal property and then you're going after it in pursuit to get it back. Go through the rules. Private necessity versus public necessity. Josie, necessity, this defense is typically triggered with which intentional tort?
Trespass, like both of the trespasses, and conversion.
Yeah, and then typically trespass to land is where we see it the most, but it can apply to all three. So basically the defense is, I needed to do that, right, to prevent some greater harm. So, the classic example is, I'm driving down the street. Josie's about to hit me in my car. I have a couple of people in the car with me. And in order to avoid this car accident, I have to veer into Wood's front lawn of his house to avoid this car accident. And then I destroy some of the, property on his front yard. And so Wood, even though, right, you have all these parties involved, you got to make sure who's suing who. Wood is suing me, right? Not the person that almost caused the accident, but the person who actually entered his property. Wood is suing me, and I'm going to want to use the defense of necessity, right? Wood, looking at these two necessities here, private and public, which one do you think I'd likely be using as a defense?
Private.
I'd likely be using private necessity. I'm not really protecting the public at large here, right? And so what's very notable about using private necessity as a defense?
Basically, it basically as you, who's the landowner? You're the landowner, right?
No, you were. I veered onto your property to avoid a car accident.
So me as a landowner, basically what it's saying is that because there's a harm, I would have to wait until the harm passes to make sure you're protected.
And so let me pause you right there. That is another good small rule, but I want to stop there because that's not the one I'm focused on. What I want to focus on first, Wood, is that because it's private necessity, this is weird, Wood. They call it a defense, right? I would argue I veered out of the way to save my life and the people's lives in this car. Okay, cool. It was necessary to enter your land. Even though it works as a defense, it says, although private necessity is a defense, the defendant must pay for any damage caused by his interference. So I still have to pay, right? So it's like, what's the value of the defense if I'm still going to be subject to damages? So for private necessity, remember, even though you'll say it was a successful defense, a person who uses private necessity still has to pay damages for any harm they caused. Whereas in a public necessity, if I entered your property now, Wood, because I was, for some reason I needed to enter your property to save the neighborhood, save the city, etc. Well, any damage I caused, I would not have to pay damages for. So both are defenses, but only one of them, right, allows the defendant to get away without paying damages. All right. And then what the other one is saying would is like, in that scenario where somebody's entering your property, as a necessity because, like, let's say there's a storm, that's going on and it's crazy. And to have safety, I need to, like, enter your property. And that's the one where you're saying, like, the rule is saying that you need to allow that person to, like, stay on the land until that risk of harm is passed. Cool. So you'll see some examples with that as well. Shopkeeper's privilege, you can go through it. Consent, we all know the basics of consent. There can be express consent or implied consent. You look at the scope of it, right? Go through it. Those are your defenses. Okay, let's go to our hypos. We're going to do our first hypo. Way to power through those intentional torts. I feel really good about that. We took a little bit longer on that than I wanted to, but I think it was solid. Intentional torts, wrap up question. So this is the last intentional torts question. So right before negligence, right before the first negligence question. Lorraine, have you found it already?
Sorry, I'm getting there.
No
I
worries.
moved my study area, but I think I need to go back to my old one. Okay, is this the Drake is at the Grammy Awards?
Drake is at the Grammy Awards. That'll
Okay.
do it. All right. So everybody, this is a group question. I want you to go ahead and read this, issue spot it, and the question is, what tort claims would you raise as a discussion, and what is the likely outcome? So you're going to outline and do some issue spotting, and then do your quick, like, likely guilty, likely not guilty, or likely liable, likely not liable for each intentional tort. All right, go for it. Remember, the difficulty a lot of times is the issue spotting. No need to put the answer in the chat for this one. You guys can just, like, write it all out because it's a good amount. And I'm gonna call on somebody to walk me through it. So I'll give you guys just like another minute or two, and we're gonna walk through it. Okay. All right. Let's go somebody off the top 5. Keep you guys on your toes. Let's go with Aaron. Aaron, let's go through this question together.
All right.
All right.
So the first one was assault when Drake approached Paula and pointed a gun at her as she was apprehensive of the imminent and serious harm.
Okay.
Next, we have false imprisonment, as when he pointed his gun at her, a reasonable person wouldn't. Is that a reasonable person?
There we go. I love it. Yes. Go back, find the rule, make sure you're aligned. Don't analyze your idea of the rule, but the actual rule.
confined. So she would be confined if someone was pointing a gun at her, because that's an imminent physical threat.
There we go.
And obviously she was aware because the gun was pointed at her. Next we have IIED.
Good.
That's pointing a gun at someone is extreme or outrageous conduct, and that conduct caused her severe emotional distress, which can be seen by her manifestation of fainting, or her action that she fainted. Then we have battery, when Drake removes the Grammy from her hand because harmful or offensive contact. Someone would, it's not harmful, but it's offensive because, let's see. It's offensive if a reasonable person will find that the contact would be offensive. Stealing a Grammy or personal property from another person would be seen as offensive.
Good.
And then lastly, we have conversion, when he serious interference with P's right to possession of her personal property. When Drake took it and lost it, he prevented her from using possessing personal property, and he lost it. So basically, that would be the to the extent that he would have to pay for that full value of the item, because it's no longer has possession.
Perfect, exactly. And remember, on an exam, you'd have also talked about trespass to chattel first, and then also conversion if it was an essay.
Conversion.
Exactly. Good. And then the other one too that you could have did a raise and dismiss argument for. The only one you missed, you did a stellar job, was assault for taking the Grammy from Paula's hand. However, it would be a raise and dismiss because she was clearly unconscious and unaware when Drake did that. So it would not be any reasonable apprehension. And again, the rule of thumb to kind of help with that is that, like, not 10 times out of 10, Aaron, but 9 times out of 10, if you're talking about battery, you might as well go ahead and talk about assault as well, and vice versa. Cool. So we had a total, guys, of 6 different torts to discuss in that small little essay, right? So again, it is very important to make sure you see how they can jam-pack all those different intentional torts into a small amount of facts. I will say that in your answers, I had a different conclusion on IIED, but I think you could definitely conclude either way on IIED. Here, when it came to the severe emotional distress, it was like there are not I leaned on the side, there are not enough facts to prove that there actually was severe emotional distress, but I really liked Aaron's argument. If that was an essay, I think that would totally be acceptable, and totally great points that here, Paula would argue that she did suffer severe emotional distress, which was evident by her fainting. But the question then does come from gauge setting, like, is fainting going to be enough to routinely amount to severe emotional distress? And that's just where I don't have an immediate answer for you guys. I don't know if there's enough to see if just fainting alone would do that. But again, if there's an essay, I think it was perfect. And you guys would do the gauge setting when you guys go through your MBEs. Arn?
Hi, DeAndre. My question is, you just mentioned about assault, raise, and dismiss.
Yeah.
I would say assault, but isn't the reason why you raise and dismiss is because the facts state that she immediately fainted? Is it like there wasn't enough time for her to apprehend it, or?
Well, yeah, it's the raise and dismiss is not the first assault; it's the second assault. So there was the assault when it was the gun, gimme, the threat, all of that. But then she fainted, and then we said he then took the item from her, and so the whole concept. And this is a stretch argument for battery, but it's still a good one to make. And it's that it's offensive to take personal property out of somebody else's hand, even though there was no harm caused. It's still offensive to like take something out of somebody's hand. So you would make that argument for battery, and then you would do the follow-up discussion for assault. Was she apprehensive of this offensive contact? And here, no, because she was fainted at the time.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right, guys. So that is intentional torts. Great job going through that. Make sure later today you go through all those intentional tort hypos and get comfortable with it. Remember, torts, guys, is going to be a lot of gauge setting and just getting familiar with like what's enough and what's not. So when you're going through questions, right, remember that. Know that's why you're in these tort questions. Don't be upset if your internal gauge is not going to be, if it's not accurate 100% of the time. Just make sure you're assessing it as you go. One last quick question for this top 5. Lorraine, what do you think is one of the most important things to do when doing MBE questions to actually be able to adjust your internal gauge? What's one of the things that you have to do to be able to adjust your internal gauge?
Map them out.
Map them
Draw
out.
them out.
So it's gonna be making sure you come up with what you think. Coming up with what you think the outcome will be. If you do a question, whether it's in class with me or on your own, and you're just like, I don't know, like this could go either way. Let me just go see what it is. Well, you're not identifying with what you think to have a gut feeling to then say my gut was wrong or right. Right? So you just kind of stay passive, and then you're never building your like gut confidence. So make sure when you're doing questions, guys, you have to pick a side. And either you're right or wrong, and then you can assess, okay, I was right, cool, I'm aligned with the way that this plays out, or you're wrong, and it's just like, I'm gonna change my perspective. But again, it's like if you don't pick a side, right, it's hard to do that. I had a professor once in law school, it's kind of vulgar of an analogy, but it's like if you don't pick one side of the road or not, you end up as roadkill, is what the professor would say. So